In 1402, the capital of China was burning. The imperial palace, seat of the greatest dynasty on earth, was in flames, and the emperor was gone. No body, no proof, no answers, just smoke, chaos, and one man left standing, a man who 3 years earlier had been a condemned rebel with no path to victory. His name was Zhu Di, and this is how he stole the dragon throne. The year was 1399. The Ming Dynasty was barely 3 decades old and already cracking at the foundation. The man who built it, the Hongwu Emperor, was a genius, a paranoid tyrant, and one of the most terrifying rulers China ever produced. He clawed his way up from peasant orphan to emperor of 60 million people. But in building his empire, he made one critical mistake. He gave his sons too much power. Each of the emperor's sons ruled their own territory. They had their own armies, their own garrisons, their own loyal officers. The logic made sense at the time. Having strong princes meant strong borders, but it also meant that if one son ever decided to stop following orders, the empire could split. When the Hongwu Emperor died, the throne passed not to one of his sons, but to his grandson, a young man who ruled under the reign title Jianwen, smart enough to see the danger, maybe not experienced enough to handle it. His advisors told him the same thing: the princes are too powerful. Move against them now, or lose everything later. So, Jianwen moved. One by one, the princes were stripped of authority, titles revoked, armies disbanded. Some were placed under house arrest. A few simply vanished. Every prince in China got the message. The throne no longer trusted the imperial family, and there was one prince in particular who understood, with absolute clarity, that he would be next. His name was Zhu Di, Prince of Yan. He controlled Beiping, the great northern city that would one day become Beijing. He commanded hardened, battle-tested troops, veterans who'd spent years on the Mongol frontier, fighting in the brutal cold of the northern plains. These weren't palace soldiers. These were men who'd earned their scars, and they loved him. That was the real problem. It wasn't just that Zhu Di had an army. Plenty of princes had armies. What made him dangerous was that his men were loyal to him personally, not to the court in Nanjing, not to the bureaucracy, not to the young emperor they'd never met. To the Jianwen Emperor, that kind of loyalty was terrifying, and it should have been. At first, Zhu Di played it perfectly. He sent letters of absolute loyalty to the court. Humble, obedient, almost pathetically submissive. He gave the emperor no clean excuse to act. But behind the scenes, imperial spies had already flooded Beiping. His officers were being quietly arrested, trusted commanders vanished in the night. Associates were dragged in for questioning. Then came the executions, and then the final move. The emperor ordered Zhu Di to come south to Nanjing. In theory, it was just a summons. In reality, everyone understood exactly what it meant. Zhu Di understood too. He did the only thing left available to a man with no good options. He pretended to go insane. According to some accounts, he spent weeks wandering the streets of Beiping in the rain, muttering gibberish, stumbling through markets, acting like a man whose mind had completely collapsed. Imperial officials reported back to the court, "The Prince of Yan is broken. He's no threat." It bought him time. Then the court made a mistake. Imperial officials moved to arrest him directly. Instead, Zhu Di struck first. His men seized the officials. Several were executed on the spot. And in August 1399, the Prince of Yan officially declared war on the emperor. But Zhu Di was too smart to simply call it a rebellion. He couldn't. Not in China, not in 1399. In the Confucian world, there was nothing more illegitimate than a prince raising arms against the Son of Heaven. If he framed this as, "I want the throne," he'd lose the political battle before the military one even started. So he reframed everything. He wasn't rebelling, he said. He was rescuing. Evil ministers had corrupted the young emperor. Treacherous officials were poisoning the court. The emperor himself was a victim, surrounded by men who were leading China to ruin. And as a loyal prince of the blood, Zhu Di had a duty to ride south and cleanse the court. In Chinese history, this became known as the Jingnan Campaign. Jingnan. Pacifying the difficulties, not a civil war, a rescue mission. It was brilliant. Many officials didn't believe a word of it, but it gave uncertain commanders a story they could tell themselves and their troops if they decided to defect. In civil wars, the narrative matters almost as much as the army. Zhu Di understood that. On paper, Zhu Di had no business winning this war. The imperial government controlled the south. Richer, more populated, better funded. The full Ming bureaucracy was mobilized against him. The court raised enormous armies. Some accounts claim hundreds of thousands of troops marching north. Zhu Di had one province and a frontier cavalry force. Early battles reflected this reality. Imperial forces attacked hard. Northern cities wavered. In the opening weeks, Zhu Di nearly lost several key positions. There were moments when it seemed the whole rebellion might collapse before it ever found its footing. But the Jianwen Emperor made a critical error. He appointed commanders based on loyalty rather than talent. Southern officers who'd spent careers in bureaucratic politics were now trying to fight cavalry warfare on the northern plains, a style of war they'd never trained for. Zhu Di had spent years on that exact terrain, chasing Mongols across frozen grasslands. He knew this landscape like a language. He fought differently than they expected. No slow advances, no grinding siege warfare. He moved fast, struck without warning, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. He destroyed supply lines, he baited overconfident commanders into exposed positions, and then hit them from unexpected directions. Speed. Shock. Momentum. That was Zhu Di's doctrine. And imperial generals, again and again, couldn't stop it. For 2 years, the war burned across northern China. Cities changed hands multiple times. Villages burned. Supply chains collapsed. Thousands died, not just in battle, but from famine, displacement, and the slow devastation that follows armies wherever they march. Zhu Di was winning, but not cleanly. Imperial forces were larger. They absorbed punishment that would have destroyed a smaller rebel force. And in 1400, at a battle called Dongcheng, the war nearly ended. The fighting was savage. Imperial forces caught Zhu Di's army in a brutal engagement and nearly surrounded them. Several of his best officers were killed. Zhu Di himself reportedly escaped only by the narrowest margin. For a moment, the rebellion looked finished, but Jianwen failed to capitalize. The imperial court hesitated. Command disputes slowed the pursuit. By the time the moment passed, Zhu Di had recovered and resumed the offensive. This became the defining rhythm of the entire war. The emperor had more soldiers. Zhu Di made better decisions, and in the long run, decisions outlast numbers. By 1402, Zhu Di made the move that would end everything, one way or another. Instead of continuing to grind through every province between Beiping and Nanjing, he decided to cut straight to the heart. He would march directly on the capital. It was an enormous gamble. If his army got bogged down deep in enemy territory, surrounded, cut off, starved, the rebellion would end in catastrophe. There would be no recovery from that. But Zhu Di had been reading his enemy for 3 years. He knew Jianwen's commanders were demoralized. He knew the court was fracturing. He knew that morale, not fortifications, not troop numbers, was the empire's real defensive wall, and that wall was crumbling. His forces swept south along the Grand Canal corridor with startling speed. City after city surrendered without a fight. Commanders who'd spent months preparing defenses looked at what was coming and opened their gates. Panic spread faster than Zhu Di's cavalry. The Jianwen Emperor tried to organize a final defense. It was too late. In July 1402, Zhu Di's army arrived outside Nanjing. The city could still have resisted. The walls were strong, defenders were present. A determined garrison might have held for months. Then a gate opened from the inside. Someone let them in. Zhu Di's forces flooded through the capital. The court collapsed, officials fled or surrendered, and somewhere in the chaos, the imperial palace caught fire. Flames tore through the complex. Bodies were found in the ruins, burned past recognition. And the Jianwen Emperor was not among the survivors. No one could confirm his death. No one could confirm his escape. He had simply vanished. For decades, the question haunted China. Some said he died in the fire. Others claimed loyal eunuchs had smuggled him out in a monk's robe, that he was alive somewhere, in a remote monastery, in a foreign kingdom, quietly growing old. Even Zhu Di seemed unsure. Later in his reign, he would sponsor great naval expeditions, the famous voyages of Zheng He, and some historians believe part of their mission was to search the known world for a missing emperor who might one day return to challenge him. Whether Jianwen was dead or alive, one thing was certain: his reign was over. Winning the war was the easy part. Now Zhu Di had a harder problem. He had seized the throne through civil war, against his own nephew, against the legitimate emperor. The cleansing the court slogan had served its purpose. But everyone in China knew the truth. He was a usurper. In Confucian political culture, that carried enormous weight. A ruler's authority rested on the mandate of heaven, and the mandate didn't go to the strongest, it went to the righteous. So Zhu Di moved immediately to control the story. Historical records were rewritten. The Jianwen reign was partially erased from official history, as if those 3 years had simply never happened. Officials were pressured to acknowledge the new emperor as the rightful continuation of the dynasty. Those who refused paid for it. The most famous case was a scholar named Feng Xiaoru. He was one of the most respected Confucian intellectuals of his generation. When Zhu Di ordered him to draft the proclamation legitimizing his rule, Feng Xiaoru refused. Publicly, deliberately, Zhu Di threatened to execute not just Feng Xiaoru, but his entire extended family. Feng Xiaoru still refused. The execution that followed became one of the most infamous acts of the early Yongle reign. Feng Xiaoru, his family, his students, his friends, his associates. The so-called 10 degrees of kinship. Hundreds of people executed for one man's refusal to write one document. The message was unambiguous. The new emperor would not debate his legitimacy. He would not tolerate questioning. He would not negotiate. Agree or disappear. Zhu Di took the reign title Yongle, perpetual happiness. He would become one of the greatest emperors the Ming Dynasty ever produced, and one of its most ruthless. He moved the capital from Nanjing to Beiping, transforming a frontier city into the center of the world's most powerful empire. He commissioned the Forbidden City. He launched Zheng He's legendary treasure fleets across the Indian Ocean, projecting Chinese power to Africa and beyond. He sent armies deep into Vietnam, Mongolia, and Central Asia. By any measure of history, the Yongle reign was extraordinary. But underneath every achievement was something that never left him: the memory of how he'd gotten there. He'd won through speed, deception, audacity, and brutality. And so the regime he built reflected exactly that. Obsessed with control, riddled with surveillance, absolute in its demand for obedience. Because Zhu Di understood, better than almost anyone in Chinese history, what happened when the throne showed weakness. He'd exploited it himself. The Jingnan Campaign was over, but in a way, it never really ended. Zhu Di would spend the rest of his life proving, to China, to the world, to himself, that heaven had chosen him. Every city he built, every fleet he launched, every campaign he won. All of it, in some way, was an answer to the same question that followed him from the day he took the throne. Was it heaven's will, or just his own?